He screamed like the world was ending. He slammed his fists against the gate. He shouted that I had broken the law. But the truth was darker, because that pool was never his to begin with. And when I showed him the lock, he didn't just lose his temper. He lost something much bigger, something that would change the whole neighborhood forever. Welcome back to HOA Scandals, the channel where we uncover the wildest and pettiest HOA battles across America. My name is Daniel. I'm just an ordinary guy living in a quiet suburban neighborhood with my family. I work from home. I pay my dues. I follow the rules. But when I put a simple smart lock on my pool gate, I discovered how far the HOA would go to control me. And that's when the real story began. I thought the smart lock would bring me peace. Instead, it brought me war. The first morning after I installed it, I woke up early. The sun was just rising over the palm trees. Birds were singing. Sprinklers were ticking across the lawns. Everything looked calm, quiet, perfect. But then I heard it, banging. I stepped outside and saw him, Karen's son, standing at my pool gate. He was slamming the metal bars with both fists. His face was already red, like he had been shouting for hours. "Open this gate," he yelled. "This is the community pool." But it wasn't. It was mine. The bills, the maintenance, the cleaning, all on me. No one else had ever paid a single dollar for it. Still, he stood there, screaming like he owned the place. I walked closer, towel still on my shoulder from the morning shower. I tried to keep calm. Relax. It's my pool, my property. This isn't for everyone. But those words made him angrier. His fists hit the keypad lock again and again, until the screen beeped in protest. I thought about Karen, his mother. She was the HOA president. Everyone feared her, her rules, her fines, her letters. But her son, he was something different. He wasn't even on the board. Yet he acted like the neighborhood was his kingdom. When he saw the smart lock glowing blue, he laughed. "This won't last a week," he said. "The HOA will tear it down. You'll pay fines so heavy you'll beg to open this gate again." I didn't answer, because I knew he wasn't bluffing. Karen had fined people for leaving trash cans out too long. She had fined someone for planting the wrong color flowers. She once forced a neighbor to repaint their mailbox, just because it was 2 inches too tall. And now, I had given her the biggest gift of all, a reason to attack me. Later that day, I found the letter, a thick yellow paper slipped under my door. Violation. Unauthorized modification to community property. Penalty. $500 fine. But the pool was mine. The lock was mine. And yet, they wrote the words community property like it had always belonged to them. I laughed at first. But then I saw the signature at the bottom. Karen's. Her pen stroke was sharp and heavy, like a knife pressed into the page. I went back outside to breathe, across the street. Curtains moved, neighbors watching me through the glass. They didn't wave. They didn't smile, just eyes peeking, waiting to see what would happen. One of them, old Mr. Hughes, whispered to me when I passed later that day. He said, "Good luck, son. Karen always wins." And then he closed his door. That night, my wife asked if we should remove the lock. She said maybe it wasn't worth the trouble. But I shook my head. No, it was more than a lock now. It was a line in the sand. The next morning, the banging returned. But this time, it was worse. Karen's son had brought 2 friends with him. They were older than me. Big guys with folded arms. They leaned against the fence while he shouted, "Open this gate or I'll make you regret it." The keypad beeped again as he slammed his fingers on it. Wrong code. Wrong code. Wrong code. The machine. He beeped louder each time. His friends laughed. He screamed until his voice cracked. It was a circus right outside my backyard. I picked up my phone. I considered calling the police, but I hesitated. What if they believed him? What if they thought it really was community property? Karen had influence. She knew everyone on the HOA board. She even had connections with the local sheriff's office. One phone call from her, and suddenly, I would look like the criminal. I stepped outside instead. I told them to leave, but they didn't. They stayed at the gate, pounding, shouting, laughing, and deep inside, I felt something strange, fear mixed with anger, like I was on trial in my own neighborhood. That night, another letter came. This one wasn't in the mailbox. It was taped right to my front door, in red ink. The words glared at me, "Remove the lock or else." I peeled it off and looked around. The street was empty, but I knew someone was watching. Someone had written it in the dark. While I was asleep inside, my hands shook as I held that paper, because I realized this wasn't just about a pool anymore. This was about control, and Karen's son wasn't going to stop until he had it. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of footsteps outside my window. Slow, heavy footsteps, like someone wanted me to hear them. I pulled back the curtain, and there he was again, Karen's son, pacing back and forth in front of my pool gate. His arms were crossed, his jaw tight, his eyes locked on the glowing keypad. It was like he had declared war on a piece of metal and plastic. And somehow, I was the enemy commander. I didn't go outside right away. I wanted to see what he would do. And soon enough, he reached into his pocket, pulled out a small notebook, and started writing. At first, I thought maybe he was sketching, but no. He was taking notes. He was writing down the times, the weather, the color of my car parked in the driveway. He was documenting everything like some kind of detective, but he wasn't looking for truth. He was looking for ammo. I finally stepped outside and said, "What are you doing?" He didn't flinch, he just said, "Evidence. For the board." The board. That invisible army of neighbors who decided what color our houses could be, what day we could put our trash out, what kind of mailboxes we could buy. Now, apparently, what kind of lock we could put on our own gate. I laughed, but my laugh sounded weaker than I wanted, because the way he stared at me, I realized something. He actually believed he was right. Later that afternoon, the letter arrived. Not the ugly yellow violation paper this time, but an official one, with the HOA seal in the corner. It said there would be a meeting to discuss my violation of community rules. I almost tore it up, but my wife stopped me. She said if we ignored it, things would only get worse. She was right, so I circled the date on the calendar. The day I would have to stand in front of Karen and her little army and defend a pool lock. The days leading up to it were torture. I couldn't walk down the street without feeling eyes on me. Curtains moved, neighbors whispered. Kids stopped playing when I passed. And then came the notes, not just taped to my door, but slipped under my car wipers, stuck on my fence. One even shoved through the crack of my mailbox, each one with the same message in different handwriting. "Remove the lock, remove the lock, remove the lock." It was like a chant, echoing through my life, and every note felt heavier than the last. Then came the fines, another $500, then $750. By the end of the week, the total was over $2,000. I hadn't even been to the hearing yet, but Karen was already stacking the deck against me. And all the while, her son never left me alone. I would catch him walking past my house, sometimes at midnight, sometimes before dawn, always staring at the pool gate like it was a crime scene. One night, I had enough. I opened the door and yelled at him to leave, but instead of walking away, he pulled out his phone. He started recording me. He kept his camera in my face and shouted, "Say that again, louder, threaten me." I realized what he was trying to do. He wanted me to snap. He wanted me to lose control, so he could take the video to the board, or maybe even the police. But I stayed calm. I shut the door, and for the first time, I actually felt afraid. The night before the hearing, I barely slept. I kept thinking about that lock, how something so small, so harmless, had turned into a battlefield when the day finally came. I walked into the community center. It was bright inside, but the air felt heavy. Karen sat at the front table, her son sitting right beside her like a prince next to a queen. 5 board members lined up with her, each with their little folders, pens, serious faces, and behind me, rows of folding chairs filled with neighbors, some here for the show, some here out of fear, some just to gossip later. Karen cleared her throat. "Mr. Daniel," she said, "you have violated Section 14B of the HOA guidelines, unauthorized modification to community-facing structures." Her voice was cold. Her son smirked beside her. I raised my hand. "With all due respect," I said, "this is my property, my fence, my pool, This lock is mine." The board members scribbled notes. Karen's son leaned back in his chair with a grin. He whispered something to his mother, and she smiled without moving her lips. One by one, the board members asked questions. Is the lock visible from the street? Does it prevent community members from accessing shared resources? Have you considered the harmony of the neighborhood? Harmony. That word made me want to laugh and scream at the same time. Was it harmony when Karen fined a widow for having the wrong color curtains? Was it harmony when her son shouted at my kids for riding bikes too close to the sidewalk? No. Harmony was just another weapon they used to keep control. When it was finally my turn to speak, I told the truth. I explained how strangers had been using my pool without permission, how I paid for every drop of water and every bit of chlorine, how the smart Lesbaus. Wasn't an act of rebellion. It was protection for my home, for my family. But as I spoke, I saw the looks on their faces, cold, detached, uninterested. They weren't listening to me. They were already planning their verdict. Karen tapped her pen. She said, "Thank you. We will deliberate." Then she looked at her son, and he nodded like a judge passing sentence. I walked out into the parking lot. The air was hot and heavy. Neighbors brushed past me without a word, and there he was again. Karen's son, leaning against his car, arms crossed. He grinned when he saw me. "You'll be sorry," he whispered. That night, I sat in my backyard, staring at the glowing lock, its little blue circle shining like a lighthouse in the dark. I thought about giving in, removing it, ending this nightmare before it grew worse. But then I remembered the banging on the gate, the screaming, the notes, the fines, the smirks, the threats, and something inside me snapped. I decided I wouldn't back down. Not this time, not ever. Because this wasn't just about a pool anymore. It was about my life in this neighborhood, my dignity, my right to say no, so I waited for the board's decision. And when it finally came, I knew the war was only just beginning. The letter from the board arrived 3 days later. I held it in my hands like it was a court summons. My wife watched me from the kitchen, her face pale. I tore it open slowly, half hoping, half dreading. It said, I was guilty. The lock had to be removed within 7 days, or I would face daily fines of $250 and possible legal action, signed by Karen herself. Bold ink, sharp strokes, almost like she wanted to carve her name into my life forever. I sat down at the table and read it again. And again, my wife begged me to let it go. But I couldn't, not after everything they had done, not after the shouting, the threats, the humiliation in front of the whole neighborhood that night. I went out back and looked at the pool. The lock glowed in the dark, blue light against black water. I whispered to myself, "No one is taking this from me." The next morning, the war exploded. I was drinking coffee when I heard a car screech outside. I rushed to the window. It was Karen's son. He jumped out and stormed to the pool gate. His phone already in his hand, he started recording himself, shouting into the camera, "Look at this! He's blocking community property. This is illegal. This is harassment." His voice cracked, but he didn't stop. He turned the camera to the lock, then back to his angry face. Neighbors came out onto their porches. Some filmed too, some shook their heads, others just watched, hungry for drama. I walked out slowly, trying to stay calm. "What are you doing?" I asked. He pointed the phone at me like it was a weapon. "I'm calling the cops," he shouted. "You're going to jail today." And then, he did it. Right there on camera, he dialed 911. He told the dispatcher that I was locking him out of a shared community pool. He said I was being violent. He said I was threatening residents. Every word was a lie. But every word was designed to destroy me. My heart pounded. I thought about what would happen when the police came. Would they believe him? Would they see the HOA letter and think I was in the wrong? Would Karen show up and twist the truth? 15 minutes later, the sirens came. 2 squad cars pulled up, blue and red lights flashing across the neat little lawns. The whole neighborhood lined up to watch. The officers stepped out. Karen's son ran to them immediately, talking fast, pointing at me, waving the violation letter in the air. He looked like a child tattling to a teacher. Except this time, he had real power behind him. The officers approached me. "Sir, can we talk?" I nodded, my hands shaking. I led them to the pool gate. "This is my property," I said, my voice steady but low. "I pay for everything here. The water, the cleaning, the fence. It's all mine." I showed them the deed, the property map I had saved on my phone. One officer studied it carefully, while the other watched Karen's son pacing like a caged dog. Finally, the officer nodded. "Sir, you're within your rights. This is private property. No law has been broken." For a moment, relief washed over me. But then came the storm. Karen's son exploded. He screamed, louder than I'd ever heard. "This is corruption. You don't understand. My mom runs this neighborhood." He kicked the gate so hard the keypad beeped. The officers had to step between us. They warned him to calm down or leave, but he didn't calm down. He screamed again, fists clenched, veins bulging in his neck. He shouted that he would sue me. He shouted that he would have me removed from the neighborhood. He shouted that he would make sure I never swim again. The officers pulled him back. One of them whispered something in his ear. His face twisted in rage. He kicked the dirt, cursed under his breath, and then, finally, he stormed off to his car and peeled away. The crowd slowly disappeared, but I could still feel their eyes. Some disappointed the show was over, some secretly happy I had won, and some angry, because siding with me meant going against Karen. That night my wife hugged me tighter than usual. She said maybe it was over now, but I knew better. Karen's son had lost in front of everyone, and men like him, they don't forgive. They don't forget. The next morning proved me right. When I stepped outside, my car tires were slashed, all 4 of them, flat to the ground. A note sat under the windshield wiper. In thick black marker it said, "Remove the lock, or else next time it won't be your car." I called the police. They came. They took a report. But they didn't have proof. No cameras caught it. No fingerprints. No witnesses brave enough to speak. I knew who it was. But knowing wasn't enough. The HOA meeting that week was chaos. Karen defended her son. She said he was the victim. She said I was harassing him by locking away community resources. She demanded the board escalate the fines. Some neighbors clapped, others sat silent, but no one stood up for me. The board announced that legal action would begin if I didn't comply. And once again, they ignored every piece of evidence I brought. I walked out of that meeting feeling smaller than ever, like I was fighting not just one man, not just one family, but an entire system designed to crush anyone who said no. That night, I sat by the pool again. The blue light of the lock reflected in the water. I thought about taking it off. I thought about giving up. But then, I thought about the laughter of Karen's son, the smirk on his face when he called 911, the way he shouted that I would regret ever standing up to him. And I knew. I couldn't stop now. The war had only just begun. The night after the police left, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying it in my head. The sirens, the neighbors watching, the officers telling me I was right. And then his face, red with rage, screaming like a child who lost his favorite toy. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. My wife whispered that it would blow over, but deep down, I knew it wouldn't. Karen's son wasn't the type to move on. He was the type to strike back, again and again. The next morning confirmed it. I stepped outside to pick up the newspaper, and there he was, across the street, leaning against his car. He wasn't yelling this time. He wasn't pacing. He was just watching, his arms crossed, his eyes fixed on me, like a hunter waiting for his prey to make the first move. I ignored him, but the weight of his stare followed me all day. Later, when I checked my mailbox, another fine was waiting. This one even bigger, $1,000. The paper smelled faintly of perfume, Karen's perfume, almost like she wanted me to know she touched it herself. I crumpled it in my hand and tossed it into the trash. But tossing a piece of paper didn't change the truth. The fines were piling up. The HOA wanted me crushed under debt until I gave in. That evening, I was grilling in the backyard with my wife and kids. The smell of burgers drifted into the air. The kids laughed near the pool. For a moment, it felt normal again, peaceful, safe. Then came the shouting. Karen's son appeared at the gate, his phone in one hand, a baseball bat in the other. He rattled the fence, his eyes wild. "You think you won?" he screamed. "You think this lock makes you safe?" He slammed the bat against the gate, metal clanging. keypad beeping with every hit. My kids froze. My wife grabbed her phone. I stepped forward. "Leave now," I said, but my voice shook more than I wanted. He laughed. "You're going to regret this," he whispered. Then he turned and walked away. Not fast, not scared. Slow, like he had all the time in the world. That night I called the HOA emergency line. No one answered. I called again the next morning. Still nothing. Finally. I went to the office in person. Karen sat behind her desk, sipping coffee like nothing was wrong. I told her what her son had done. She smirked. She said, "Boys will be boys." I said he came to my property with a weapon. She shrugged. "Maybe you should have thought about that before you installed your little lock." Her words were sharp, but her eyes were sharper, cold, smug, certain she held all the cards. I left that office shaking with anger because I realized she didn't just support her son, she was using him. She wanted him to push me harder, to scare me into giving up so she could stand back and say her hands were clean. The next week was hell. Eggs on my driveway, trash dumped over my fence, anonymous calls in the middle of the night, heavy breathing on the other end. My wife cried herself to sleep. My kids asked why people hated us. And still, the fines kept coming. $250, $500, $200, each one bolder than the last. Finally, I reached my breaking point. I bought cameras, 4 of them, 1 for the front yard, 1 for the backyard, 2 hidden near the pool gate. If Karen's son wanted war, I would give him a battlefield where every move was recorded. It didn't take long. 2 nights later, the cameras caught him, sneaking across the lawn with his bat, tapping the lock, cursing under his breath. He tried to pry it open. He tried to smash it, but the lock held strong. The blue light blinked back at him, mocking him. And in that moment, he lost control. He swung the bat again and again. Sparks flew from the keypad. The screen cracked. He screamed so loud the neighbors' lights flicked on. Dogs barked, curtains shifted, and still, he kept swinging until the police showed up again. I stood at the window as the red and blue lights lit up the night. The officers pulled him away. This time, they didn't just warn him, they put him in cuffs. But even then, as they dragged him to the car, he shouted at me, "This isn't over. My mom will bury you." The neighborhood buzzed with gossip the next day. Some said he'd be out in hours. Some said Karen would get him off with a lawyer. Some said I should sell the house and leave while I still could. But I didn't leave, because I had the footage. Clear as day, Karen's son destroying my property. Screaming threats, caught in 1080p with sound. I took it straight to the HOA board meeting. I played the video on the big screen. Every member watched. Every neighbor gasped. And for the first time, Karen's face cracked. Her son's rage filled the room, his voice echoing through the speakers, his bat smashing again and again, her hands clenched on the table, her smile gone. When the video ended, silence. No one spoke, not even Karen. Finally, one board member cleared his throat. "This is concerning," he muttered. Another whispered that legal action might actually be necessary. Against him. Not me. Karen tried to protest. She said the video was fake. She said I staged it, but the board wasn't listening anymore. They had seen too much, and for the first time, I felt the tide turn. But here's the thing about power. When people lose it, they don't just surrender. They explode that night. Karen showed up at my door. Her eyes were dark, her voice low. "You think you're clever," she whispered. "You embarrassed my family. You embarrassed me." She leaned in closer. "This neighborhood will never forgive you." Then she turned and walked away into the shadows. I stood there frozen, because even though her son was the one with the bat, Karen was the real danger. She wasn't going to stop. Not until I broke. The video changed everything. But it didn't end anything. For a few days, the neighborhood was quiet. Karen's son was gone, kept out of sight. Neighbors whispered that he was staying with relatives. Some said he was banned from board meetings. Others said he was just hiding until things cooled down. I hoped it meant peace, but deep down, I knew better. Karen wasn't the type to retreat. She was the type to reload. The first sign came in the mail. Not a fine this time, but a thick envelope from a law office. Inside was a letter with heavy words, "Cease and desist." It claimed I was defaming Karen's son. It claimed the video was edited and misleading. It threatened me with a lawsuit for harassment. I read it twice, then a third time. It was pure intimidation. She was trying to scare me into silence, trying to flip the script, make me the villain. But I wasn't afraid anymore because I had the truth, and the truth was on tape. Still, the letter shook my wife. She said maybe we should stop, maybe we should just take the lock off and end the war, but I shook my head. No, that's exactly what she wants. The next week, the HOA board met again. The atmosphere was different. Before, the board always sided with Karen. Now, they looked uneasy. 2 of them avoided her eyes. One even spoke softly to me in the hallway. He said, "You should keep that footage safe. It might be the only thing that protects you." When the meeting began, Karen came out swinging. She slammed her hand on the table and shouted that the video was fake. She claimed I hired actors. She claimed I staged everything just to humiliate her. But the more she shouted, the less people seemed to believe her. Because everyone knew Karen's son. They had all seen him lose his temper before. They had all heard the stories, for once. The board didn't vote right away. They said they needed more time. They said they wanted to investigate further. It wasn't a victory, but it wasn't a defeat either. It was something Karen hated even more. Doubt. The next morning, my phone buzzed with notifications. Anonymous numbers flooding me with texts. Some messages said liar. Some said we're watching you. Others just sent pictures of my house, my car, my kids playing in the yard. My wife cried when she saw them. I called the police. But they said unless there was a direct threat, there wasn't much they could do. That's when I realized. Karen wasn't fighting me in daylight anymore. She was fighting me in the shadows. One night, I heard scratching outside my window. I grabbed a flashlight and crept out. The beam caught movement near the fence. Someone ducked and ran. I chased, but by the time I reached the street, it was empty. When I came back, I saw it, spray paint across the side of my fence. Locks don't last forever. I cleaned it the next morning, but the message stayed in my head. Every creak of the house at night made me jump. Every passing car felt like eyes staring at me. Neighbors began to avoid me too. Some who used to smile now crossed the street. Others kept their curtains drawn. It was like Karen's poison was spreading. She didn't just want me isolated, she wanted me erased. But something unexpected happened too. A few neighbors started talking to me quietly, whispers on the sidewalk, quick words at the mailbox. They told me they were tired of Karen, tired of her rules, her fines, her son's tantrums. They said they wished they could fight back, but they were too scared. I realized then, I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for everyone who lived in her shadow. So I doubled down. I printed copies of the property deed. I highlighted the lines that proved the pool was mine. I gathered every violation letter, every fine, every note they had ever sent. I created a folder thicker than a Bible, and I sent copies to the board, the police, even the county clerk's office. Karen wanted war, so I gave her paper bombs. She didn't take it well. A few days later, I came home to find my mailbox ripped out of the ground. It lay twisted on the lawn, a rock stuffed inside with another note, "You can't win." My wife begged me to leave the neighborhood. She said it wasn't worth it anymore. But I couldn't walk away. Not when Karen was trying to prove she owned me. Not when her son had smashed my gate with a bat and screamed in my face. Not when the whole neighborhood watched me like a criminal while she played queen. The breaking point came one Saturday afternoon. I was skimming leaves from the pool when I heard shouting. I looked up. Karen's son was back, not with a bat this time, but with a megaphone. He stood in the street blasting his voice through the speaker. "This man is a liar. This man is a thief. He stole our pool." His words echoed off every house. Neighbors peeked from windows, some recorded with their phones, and I stood there, frozen. Because this was it. His final freakout. I shouted for him to leave. He pointed the megaphone at me. "You're going to regret this lock. You'll regret ever crossing the HOA." The police came again. The same officers as before. They took the megaphone from him. They warned him again, but this time I saw it in their faces. They were tired of him too. They told him if he set foot on my property again, he'd be arrested on the spot. He shouted curses as they dragged him away. Karen appeared moments later, her face pale, her voice trembling. For once, she didn't have a smile. She just whispered, "You think this is over, but it's not." And then she walked back into her house, slamming the door so hard the glass shook. That night, I sat by the pool again. the blue light of the lock reflected in the water. I thought about everything that had happened. The fines, the threats, the spray paint, the megaphone, and I realized something important. Karen and her son weren't just fighting me because of a lock. They were fighting me because I had said no, and people like them. They couldn't stand being told no. It wasn't about rules anymore. It was about control, about power, about fear. And for the first time, I felt something new. Not fear, not anger, but determination. Because if I could survive this storm, I could survive anything. The megaphone incident should have ended everything, but instead, it only made things worse. 2 days later, I got another thick envelope in the mail. This one wasn't just from a law office. It was from the county courthouse. Karen had filed a lawsuit against me. The papers claimed I was violating HOA bylaws, that my smart lock was damaging community harmony, that I had endangered residents by restricting access to shared amenities. It was the same lie they had told the police, but now it was written in legal ink. My wife sat at the kitchen table with her head in her hands. The kids played quietly in the other room. I stared at the papers until the words blurred together. A court date was set for 2 months from now. 2 months of waiting, 2 months of pressure, 2 months of knowing Karen would use every second to twist the knife, and she did. The very next morning, I found flyers taped to every mailbox on the street. Big, bold letters at the top. Dangerous neighbor alert. Beneath it was my name, my address, even a picture of me standing by the pool. The flyer claimed I was hostile, that I was endangering children by blocking access to a safety resource. It was filled with lies, but to anyone who didn't know the truth, it looked real. I tore one down, crumpled it in my fist. But when I looked around, some neighbors were reading them carefully. Others shook their heads at me. One even muttered shame under his breath as he walked past. Karen was poisoning the well, and the worst part was, it was working. For weeks, I lived in a fog of stares and whispers. Walking my dog felt like walking through enemy territory. Every mailbox I passed seemed to hold another flyer. Every glance from a neighbor felt sharper than the last. But then, something unexpected happened. One night, as I was taking the trash out, a voice called softly from across the street. It was Mr. Hughes, the old man who had once told me, "Karen always wins." He shuffled closer, glanced around nervously, and handed me a small envelope. Inside were photocopies of emails, board emails, leaked from one of the members. The emails showed how Karen pressured them, threatened them with removal if they didn't vote her way. She even bragged about how much money the HOA made off fines, how those fines paid for her events and board perks. It was proof that she wasn't just strict, she was corrupt. "Keep this safe," Mr. Hughes whispered. "Not everyone's against you. Some of us are just scared." Then he shuffled back into his house before anyone saw. I sat up all night reading those emails. Every word burned into my brain, and for the first time in weeks, I felt hope. But Karen must have sensed it, because the next day, she struck again. This time, it wasn't notes or flyers, it was people. She sent groups of neighbors to inspect my property. They walked slowly past the fence, pointing, jotting things in little notebooks. They took pictures of my grass, my paint, my car parked an inch too close to the curb. They were looking for anything, any reason to find me more, to bury me deeper. By the end of that week, I had 6 new violations. Grass too long, weeds in the cracks, trash bins not perfectly aligned with the curb, a flower pot obstructing visual harmony. Each violation came with a fine, each fine stacked higher, and each fine felt less about rules and more about punishment. My wife begged me again to give up. She said maybe we should just move, but I couldn't. I told her, if we left now, Karen would win, and if she won, she'd only do it to the next person, and the next, until no one dared to stand up again. The night before the court date, I sat at the pool again. The lock glowed faintly in the dark. I thought about everything it had cost me, thousands in fines, sleepless nights, fear, anger, humiliation. But then I thought about Karen's son, screaming with a megaphone in the street, caught on video smashing my gate, and I thought about the emails, her secrets exposed, and I realized I had more than just a defense, I had a weapon. The courthouse was packed the next morning. Neighbors filled the benches. The board sat in the back row. Karen stood at the plaintiff's table in a crisp suit, her son by her side, glaring at me like he wanted to burn a hole through my chest. The judge entered. Everyone rose, and the trial began. Karen's lawyer spoke first. He painted me as a dangerous loner, someone who hated the community, someone who walled himself off and endangered children. His words were sharp, rehearsed, polished. Then it was my turn. I stood slowly. My hands shook, but my voice was steady. I told the story from the beginning. The trespassing, the strangers using my pool, the lock, the fines, the harassment. And then I played the video. The courtroom filled with the sound of Karen's son screaming, the bat slamming into metal, the keypad sparking, the threats, the rage, the meltdown. The judge leaned forward. The room went silent. Karen's face turned pale. Her son buried his head in his hands. Then I pulled out the emails. I read them aloud. Karen's words about profits from fines, her threats to board members, her bragging about power. Every line hit like a hammer. By the time I finished, the courtroom felt different. Neighbors who once glared at me now stared at Karen. The board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Even the judge's expression hardened. When it was over, the judge dismissed the case. He said the pool was clearly mine, the lock was legal, and the HOA had overstepped its authority. He even hinted at a possible investigation into their practices. It was a victory, but it didn't feel like the end, because as I walked out of that courthouse, I felt her eyes on me. Karen didn't shout. She didn't argue. She just stared. And in that stare, I saw something worse than anger. I saw promise. Promise that this wasn't over. Promise that she would find another way to strike back. That night, I sat by the pool again. The blue light flickered gently. The water rippled in the breeze. And I asked myself the same question over and over. How far would Karen go? How far would her son go? And how far was I willing to go to stop them? Winning in court should have been the end. But it wasn't. Karen disappeared for a few weeks. No notes, no fines, no flyers. The neighborhood felt lighter, almost normal again. Neighbors nodded at me when I passed. Some even whispered good job under their breath. For a moment, I thought maybe it was over. But then, she came back. It started small. Late-night knocks on the door. But no one there. My trash cans tipped over in the morning. Small dents in my car. Little reminders that I was still being watched. Then came the letters again. Not official ones. Anonymous ones. Enjoy your victory while it lasts. You'll never belong here. Locks break. Families break faster. My wife wanted to move. She begged me every night. But I told her, no, not yet. Because I knew Karen, and I knew people like her don't stop until they're forced to stop. And soon, fate forced her. One hot summer evening, I was cleaning the pool when I heard shouting. I peeked through the fence and saw Karen's son in the street. He was screaming at two teenagers riding skateboards. He accused them of scratching his car. They denied it. He didn't care. His face turned red. His fists clenched. And then, he shoved one of them. The boy fell hard on the pavement. Neighbors rushed out. Phones came up. Cameras recorded everything. And just like that, the neighborhood saw what I had seen all along. The rage, the entitlement, the violence. The police came again. This time, they didn't let him off. They arrested him in front of everyone. Karen ran out screaming at the officers. But no one defended her. Not this time. The videos spread. First in the neighborhood group chat. Then on social media. By the end of the week, the whole town knew about Karen's son. And for the first time, people weren't laughing at me. They were laughing at them. Karen tried to spin it. She sent long emails blaming outsiders. She claimed her son was protecting the community. But no one bought it anymore. Even the board began to distance themselves. 2 members resigned. Another openly criticized her leadership. Then the county announced an investigation. Not into me, into the HOA itself. Those leaked emails had started something bigger. Auditors came. Lawyers circled. Neighbors whispered about missing funds and illegal fines. And then, the final blow landed. The county froze the HOA's accounts. All fines, all collections. Suspended. Karen's empire. Gone overnight. I still remember the day the letter arrived. Not a violation, not a threat, but a formal notice. The HOA board is dissolved pending investigation. The queen had lost her crown, but Karen didn't go quietly. She marched down the street one last time, her hair wild, her voice shrill. She shouted at neighbors, called them traitors, blamed me for everything. She even tried to rip the lock off my gate with her bare hands. She failed, she stumbled, and for the first time, the neighborhood laughed at her, laughed at the woman who had once ruled them with fear. After that, she vanished. Her house went up for sale. Her son moved away. The legend of Karen's family became nothing more than whispers at block parties. And me, I stayed. The fines were erased, the threats stopped. The neighbors who once feared her began to breathe again. We held our first real community gathering without her. No rules about chairs, no inspections of flower pots, just laughter, food, kids playing freely in the street. That night, I sat by my pool, the smart lock glowing softly in the dark. My wife smiled, my kids splashed, and for the first time in years, I felt peace. But peace has a strange taste, because even as I relaxed, even as the neighborhood healed, I still asked myself one thing: why did it take so long? Why did so many people stay silent until she destroyed herself? Why did no one fight back sooner? And maybe that's the lesson, in neighborhoods like mine, in communities run by fear. Evil doesn't thrive because it's strong. It thrives because good people stay quiet too long. Karen thought she was untouchable. Her son thought the world owed him everything. But in the end, they were undone by their own arrogance, by their own rage, by their own freak out. And me. I learned something too. Sometimes the strongest lock isn't on a gate. It's on your will, on your decision not to back down. No matter how many fines, no matter how many threats, no matter how many Karens scream in your face. Because in the end, the truth always outlives the lies, and justice, even in suburbia, always finds its way.